lean right into the question. So please, and I go by Pedro, so please, Pedro Martinez. I am currently serving as the CEO of the Chicago Public Schools, or superintendent of Chicago Public Schools, finishing my 4th school year. But my origin starts actually as someone born in Mexico, came to this country when I was turning 6, grew up, my family moved to Chicago. I was a Chicago public school kid. I'm the oldest of 12, 10 of us still alive, all public school kids. My parents had a 2nd grade education, and so my parents knew what they knew, and so my father, we lived in poverty. He worked 2 jobs all of his life. Never got to meet my children. I married older. I'm a father of 2 children, incoming 9th grader and incoming 6th grader, a boy and a girl. And my father never got to meet them. He had a hard life. He died at a young age, and I watched somebody growing up that now I can really respect and really understand more what he went through. But at that time, really still struggling as a kid, really trying to understand why our life was the way it was. So I was the first in my family to graduate from high school, first to go to college. What I didn't know at that time was that all my siblings were watching what I was doing. And so when all of my family members have finished high school, everybody has done something past high school. In fact, 3 teachers in the family, a nurse, a soldier. One of my brothers had got his certification. He can take apart a diesel truck engine and put it back together. Just phenomenal talent. And I started in the consulting world, PricewaterhouseCoopers and Deloitte & Touche. Then I joined, and then I went into the nonprofit world, which was much more mission-driven, working for the Archdiocese of Chicago. And then I got to meet Arnie Duncan when he was the CEO of the Chicago Public Schools. And he was recruiting, he was establishing a team, because at that time, the school district had less than a 40% graduation rate. It was in the early 2000s when New York, Chicago, and Miami were all trying to figure out how to turn around the school district. By the way, I got to meet the Boston team after I joined CPS here at Harvard, and I got to meet Tom Paysan and saw the work that he was leading in Boston. And during that time, it really was a time when I came in through the financial world. I was the CFO, but then I was adopted by the academics team and mentored and really inspired to go deeper in academics. And that allowed me then to go into national training programs, get my certifications. I spent my early part in academics being the chief academic officer at 2 large districts in Nevada, both southern and northern Nevada, including Clark County, which has 300,000 students. So I spent my first 3 years before I became a superintendent doing that to really understand the work of our teachers, the work of our school leaders. I tell you, it's still to this day the best job I ever had. I had a great partnership with the unions. They didn't like my superintendent because they were negotiating a contract, but they liked me. And I got to spend time understanding what it takes to create a strong, rigorous curriculum. What it takes to make sure that our students, as they're going through high school, really do have the opportunities that they need to be successful beyond high school. So developing school models, implementing intervention systems. And then from there, I became a superintendent. First in northern Nevada. Unfortunately, after one election, I also learned the hard lesson of what happens when board changes. And so the new board came in, wanted to redirect funds that we were really putting aside, that were getting great success and increasing graduation rates. Got into a big dispute with them. I stood our ground. I had complete support of the governor and staff at that point, but unfortunately, wound up having to separate from there. So went to San Antonio, and San Antonio, when I got there, was one of the lowest performing school districts in the state and in the country. But what I also learned from Nevada is the importance of your relationship with your board. And so I spent especially my first year building that trust level with the board and with community. In 7 years there, never had a vote that wasn't unanimous. And by the way, that board and that community was ready for aggressive changes. And so we moved fast. And so we made significant changes at the leadership level, at the school leadership level, implemented strong practices, went from the lowest performing school district, by the way, a district with over 90% poverty. And I'm talking poverty, so I want to separate low income versus poverty, and I'll tell you more later throughout the interview about how we changed how people looked at that. Became partner with the Commissioner of Education, Mike Morath, who's still a great friend of mine, and really worked together not only to align what was happening in San Antonio, but in the entire state, and led to some amazing partnerships, including San Antonio being the architect for the biggest redesign and funding in the history of Texas. By the way, all aligned to equity around students of poverty, students with second languages, and so the district became the fastest improving in the state. And in fact, the commissioner said that San Antonio is showing the state that poverty will not determine destiny. That is a quote in the media. He announced the results in the state for the first time in our district. And I was doing well in San Antonio. The pandemic hit, but we were ready for it. I had to stand up with some fights, and this time it was with the governor and the district attorney, who didn't believe in our children masking and didn't want to prioritize our teachers for vaccinations. And I fought that hard. We in a very responsible way, brought our schools back after the schools were shut down in the spring of 2020. We responsibly brought them back, but I needed to advocate for both my families and my students, and that was a very public fight, so you can look it up. And so, but again, got through that. And then as I'm, finishing my 7th year, by the way, 3 contract extensions, going to 2 board elections, I'm thinking, I'm good. I'm going to be good. I'm going to be, Texas, it wasn't my first place, but hey, it's good. And so then I get a call from Arnie Duncan, who again, remember, he had hired me and put me on this path for education. And I said, Pedro, and then Janice Jackson, who was the former CEO, good friend of mine, she was a principal when I was there at CPS, so we got very close. And she said, look, Chicago needs a new leader. Janice was about to move on, and you're the only one in the country that can do this. And I just thought, really? I have my plan, it's all laid out. I always say this, that God has a sense of humor, right? You have your plan, and all of a sudden something happens that completely disrupts that plan. Long soul searching, and I said, look, this is my hometown. This is the district that put me on this path. They gave so much to me and my family. It's hard not to go back and need it when it needs help. And so I went back. The district was in disarray. The children were just barely coming back into classes. There had been walkouts by the union and staff every year for 3 years in a row. There was no trust with our parents. There was no trust with our school leaders. It felt, and I had been watching the district improve over time, and I had been part of a lot of the early work, and it felt like that work was at risk, that it was going to literally fall apart. And this is the 4th largest district in the country, over 300,000 students. Families were leaving in droves. We were losing 10,000 children every single year. So think about that in some of your small districts. And so we were losing that every single year. So the first year I was able to stabilize the district and just build trust, and I'll talk later about some of those strategies. I'm finishing my 4th year. By the end of the 2nd year, we were leading the nation in recovery for literacy, led by our Black students, and second by our Latinx students. Our high schools hit record levels across graduation rates, credits earned. We are, and that continued into my 3rd year. And by the way, this year will be my strongest ever. And this is a district that leads the country in students going to college. 70% of our graduates go to college, 73% persist, with record levels of scholarships and credits earned. And when I look at what's happening today in Massachusetts, Chicago is the epicenter of autonomy. It is deep in our roots. In fact, there's unique, conditions there in Chicago that don't exist anywhere in the country. So for example, as a CO superintendent, I don't choose the school leaders for the school. Every school has a local school council. They're elected, and they are the ones that choose the school leader, give the school leader a 4-year contract, and evaluate the school leader. So imagine that kind of environment that's been in existence for more than 3 decades. And so when you're that type of leader, your level of influence, your level of communication, the way you have to work with everybody is just, it almost feels like you're a state. 77 communities, and those communities couldn't be more different, all with their own history. Some of it history that's not very good, not very kind, right? Redlining, a lot of segregation, a lot of racism that's deep in the community. And like I said, there was a lot of mistrust with the district. But as I'm finishing my 4th year, the district has never been stronger. And what I see as an opportunity in Massachusetts, somebody who has been deep in the field, who has nothing but respect for our teachers and school leaders, understands their challenges, not only as a leader, as a student who has lived those experiences, as the perspective that I have as a parent compared to what my children have had access to because of my wife and I, compared to what I had access to when my parents living in poverty, I bring those lived experiences to the role. And what I can tell you is that, you know, it's interesting, you know, Massachusetts has you know, I know some of you are still upset about what happened with the removal of the state assessment for high schools. I get that, and especially Massachusetts has a lot of pride about your standards. Again, I'm an early study of Massachusetts back in the 2000s. We were watching everything you were doing. But I got to tell you, this is one of the most refreshing opportunities that I think you will have. And let me tell you why. One of my challenges as a district leader, and I was able to shape accountability in Nevada, I was able to shape accountability in Texas, and the commissioner was kind enough so that he allowed me to make sure that he saw the lens through different types of children with different demographics. Children that are English learners, children that live in poverty, children that are middle class students, children that are advanced, right? So looking at that lens in a holistic way. And I would, you know, and I am very close also with former Secretary Cardona, and he and I would have this conversation. I said, Secretary, you talk about this vision, I said, you know, about students being biliterate and bilingual. Students, you know, graduating with certifications and being able to go into, you know, high wage, livable jobs. Kids going to college, you know, with college credit, doing, you know, kids that can pass the ACT and SAT and get into highly selective colleges. Our special needs students who, again, getting them into work programs that really, because parents want them to be independent. And so, but yet the accountability system at the federal level is not aligned to that. It's not aligned to that in the state level as well. And so my high schools, which I love, and I am, you know, I have a huge bias in favor of high schools, by the way. Not that I have any, my elementaries are awesome, but I have true respect for high schools. They're rule followers, and they're competitive. And so, and that's a healthy competition. And they love to hit their metrics and to exceed their metrics. But when the North Star is confusing, it creates challenges. Now, luckily for me in Chicago, I had the autonomy to be able to create that system for our district, always with respect to the state, but I had that. But in Texas, we got to build it at the state level. And I will tell you, when you can have that alignment and that coherence, there is nothing like it in terms of being able to support children with different needs, being able to move districts along, being able to align resources, policy and legislation, working with the legislature and the governor's office. I mean, there is nothing like it. So that's one huge opportunity. The other is, you know, my lived experience as a leader. I understand what many of these district leaders deal with, whether it's the governance issues sometimes that occur in terms of the politics, whether it's having to build capacity with teachers, which, by the way, they're trying their best, but, you know, in Texas, I found that many of our teachers just hadn't had the proper supports and training, and that's what it was. They had the heart for it. They just we never invested in their capacity. Or our school leaders, where we never did enough to build their capacity. And so the desire was there. I never found any issues with that. But again, there was a lack of resources. There was a lack of understanding. And frankly, I'll say this, a lack of respect. A lack of respect for the work in the field. And so what I bring to you and I see as an opportunity is to set a strong vision with the secretary, with this board, with the governor, and to be really clear that it's not just a vision. It is not just about values, which I hope you're hearing it, you know, in what I'm saying. It's about how you walk those values. It's about how you align the resources, how when it gets tough, we stand up for our district leaders. We stand up for those board chairs that are willing to make big changes. We're willing to listen to parents and help them understand why the changes have to occur. And we always, unapologetically, always look at students that are furthest from opportunity. Because look, I will always be a proponent for all students. Students that are advanced should also grow academically, but the systems are designed for them. They're designed for children like my children. And they don't always work, by the way, and we can hold them accountable. But they're not designed for children that live in poverty. They're not designed for children with disabilities. They're not designed for children that are English learners. That task falls on all of us. And we have to wear that hat, we have to wear that role. Nobody else can do it. Everybody has their advocate. Unions advocate for their members. God bless them. I wish my father would have been part of a union. He would have had a better life. God bless them. You have vendors have advocates. Everybody has advocates. But the advocacy for children falls on us, whether it's district leaders, boards, it falls on us. And so for me, I understand that very clearly, there is no doubts, and even if that comes at a personal sacrifice. And so leaders, because of that, I have always had the respect of my cabinet. I've always been able to build teams. I've been able to great teams around the school leadership. And I know even in my current work, I do quite a bit of mentoring for superintendents because unfortunately, well, I should say fortunately, I've now become one of the old superintendents. I used to be the aspiring superintendent, looking up to Tom Paisans and Arnie Duncan and several other leaders. And now I've become the person that's mentoring many up-and-coming leaders. And so what I see as an opportunity here in Massachusetts to not only live the great standards that you've set from the past, but to set a very bold vision. Because I'll tell you, and the last thing I'll say is, I started looking at your 10 largest school districts. And, fun fact, every district that I've led has been bigger, even, the smallest district I've ever led has been San Antonio, which is about the size of Boston. But I looked at the districts, and I got to tell you, I was fascinated by the demographics. If somebody would have told me that in your 10 largest districts, the amount of poverty, or I should say low income, because again, we'll get into a different conversation about poverty, but low income students, the fast growing EL population that you have, I never would have guessed it. I just wouldn't. And then I see the variance in performance across all the districts. And by the way, the strongest correlation is to poverty, is to income. And so it's fascinating to me because even as I look at the school districts, you have some school districts where the largest group are white students, and because their poverty is high, their performance is not very strong. And then you have so many districts where your fastest growing population is your Latinx population, as well as your English learner population. And so for me, it opens up more questions about wanting just to know the history of these communities, wanting to really understand what their challenges are, and again, really create the alignment from the state all the way down to the district level with the practices that I know have helped me get amazing results, and using my the knowledge that I have to really support district leaders and really in school leaders as well.